What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick. Welcome back to the Sympathizer, Chapter 12. This time around, we are on Chapter 12, and I'm really glad to be back in the U.S., to be honest with you. The theme song for this episode is The Boys Are Back in Town, the Sympathizer back in the States, doing a welcome home tour, interacting with all of his old mates. Really enjoyed this chapter. I didn't really know how much I missed kind of everyone else that the Sympathizer was interacting with on a day-to-day basis until I got to this chapter. And yeah, this one was great, I thought. Probably one of the better ones in recent memory. I know I say that about every one of them, but I really think that this one was super rad. So we're going to get into, the drill, super bare bones summary, get into a little bit more of a play-by-play of the events of the chapter, and then kind of look a little bit closer at one of the situations which I thought could potentially be a little bit more important than everything else. So, bare bones summary up first. Let's get into it. The Sympathizer returns from the set of the Hamlet to find things have changed but also stayed the same. We visit the General's new revenue stream for the movement. A bribe is paid. The Sympathizer visits the Major's widow, where he reflects on his parentage. And finally, a surprise visit to Sophia turns up more surprises than initially expected. So like I said, we're literally just making the rounds here, catching back up with all the usual suspects in the book. Yeah, like I said, I think that this chapter was really awesome. I was a little bit fatigued by the Hamlet sequence, I think, but being back in the States and kind of getting back into, the lives of all the other characters in the book, I think really starts to kind of get the ball rolling a little bit faster. Like I said before, the theme song today, Boys Are Back in Town by Thin Lizzy. The Sympathizer returns to Los Angeles after his discharge from the Filipino hospital, and ever-faithful Bone is there to pick him up from the airport. Through Bone, the Sympathizer learns of the newly minted revenue stream for the movement. The General and the Madame have opened a pho restaurant in Chinatown. Before visiting, the Sympathizer pens a letter outlining the closure of production on the Hamlet, his return home, and the news regarding the movement to his aunt in Paris. Next, the Sympathizer visits the noodle shop to kind of debrief with the General and the Madame. The store is kind of a hole in the wall, poorly taken care of, ugly paint, a greasy spoon in the classic definition of greasy spoon, for sure. But even though the Sympathizer visits early in the day, the booths and the store in general are filled with paying customers. So people hungry for the taste of home is what the General says. Every seat in the shop is full, and the patrons are slivering happily at the Madame's perfect pho. The General is less than thrilled about the opening of the restaurant. He kind of thinks the work is below him, which I disagree with as a restaurant person myself. Working in a restaurant I think is awesome. Everyone should do it at least once in their life. But the General is relieved at the influx of cash that the movement that the store provides. He kind of outlines the developments that have occurred since the Sympathizer left to work on the film. Uniforms and flags are in the process of being secured by the Madame. A group of volunteers has kind of already begun training locally. And from these volunteers, a more selected group will be chosen for a reconnaissance mission that the General is planning through the jungles of Thailand to kind of secure an overland route into Vietnam. Bone obviously has already volunteered to be a part of this do-or-die recon mission, and the Sympathizer feels compelled to kind of volunteer himself as well. He's shot down by the General, but his request to join the mission kind of delights the General, and he's excited to be correct in his assumption that the Sympathizer would, commit fully to the cause. The general says that he'll be of more use to the team, to the movement in general, really, if he remains stateside and kind of helps with the facilitating of the politicking, the palm greasing and the planning of the movement itself. And the scene kind of closes with the Sympathizer noticing a carved wooden clock on the wall, and it's carved in the shape of Vietnam, which I think is pretty cool. But it appears to be set to the wrong time. When the Sympathizer kind of brings this up to the Madame, she says, nope, it is set to Saigon time. So the Sympathizer is kind of reflecting in this last little bit of this segment on the kind of displacement of the refugees, not just locationally, but also temporally. He talks about how they're going in circles in time, just trying to get back to their homeland, more or less. So I thought that was some pretty cool turns of phrase in that little segment. Then to the general and the Madame, and also to the reader, the Sympathizer recounts the kind of payoff that he receives from the film studio while he was still in the hospital. Some of the best writing in the chapter, I think, takes place in this little segment. His little confrontation with the loss of the memory and the little lying he does to the emissary from the production studio. I think it's some of the best writing in the chapter. So we're not going to go over everything with a super fine-tooth comb, but I think that it is really looking at this segment kind of line by line in your own time and just, living in the essence of it for sure. Violet and the emissary from the production studio, who is a tall, thin white man with a paisley tie as fat as Elvis and a yellow shirt the color of urine after eating asparagus, visit the Sympathizer in the hospital the morning after the Vietnamese extras had come by to drop off the Johnny Walker. Violet says that everyone on the set is worried about him, and this everyone kind of includes the auteur, which the Sympathizer finds a little bit difficult to believe. The emissary produces a report of the events as told by the film studio, of course, and offers the Sympathizer $5,000 for his troubles, as well as full payment of any and all hospital bills related to the accident. The Sympathizer kind of plays the game here, and he plays it really, really well, citing the fact that $5,000 is not really enough for someone who is the sole breadwinner for an extended family the way that he is, and the way that kind of any Asian person would kind of hold a mantle of responsibility when coming into a large sum of money like that. He comments on the nature of the Asian family and that if he were responsible for solely himself, then the amount would probably be fine. But since he has to worry about his parents and his grandparents and his cousins and his aunts and uncles and, the village necessarily, there is simply no way that only $5,000 will work. And he counteroffers with $20,000, which, like I said, he plays the game really, really well here. The emissary kind of understands perfectly, he is of Italian heritage, so he kind of has a similar family structure type dynamic that he's working with, but he maintains that $20,000 is far too much money. Now, if he had lost a finger, or preferably a large appendage, which is what he says, then $20,000 would be no trouble at all, but to come out of the situation relatively unscathed, not so much. The Sympathizer maintains that he has suffered a grievous injury, the loss of memory that he's unable to recapture, and what's worse, he doesn't even remember what it is he forgot. But at the end of the day, the Sympathizer and the emissary settle on a sum of $10,000, half of what he was initially asking for, but double what they were originally intending on paying him. So at the end of the day, he kind of comes out on top here. The Sympathizer again reflects on the nature of lying and, the whole man of two faces type motif. I'm not even going to really get too deeply into this because it's just not beating a dead horse at this point, but it's just, kind of saying the same thing that we've said a few times already. And, no use really getting too deep into that anymore. It's good to see that even though he's bedridden following the accident, that he's still kind of able to tap into that little fountain of lying that he's got within him and kind of make magic when he needs to. Violet leaves, but before she does, she tells him that they couldn't have made the movie without him. The sympathizer is kind of unsure whether or not to believe whether or not that's true, but there's really no harm in believing a little white lie every now and again, even when especially when you're, needing it to kind of feel a little bit better about almost dying in an accident that may or may not have been caused intentionally by a enemy that you also happen to work for. Back stateside, the sympathizer deposits the check into his Barron bank account, and leaving half in the bank, he takes half in an envelope to the major's widow. After his meeting with the general and the madame, he visits the major's widow in Monterey Park for a little catch-up and to hand off the envelope of cash. The widow greets the sympathizer warmly, which really doesn't make him feel much better about the whole murdering her husband type thing. And she prefers ladyfingers and tea upon him, insisting that he eat during his visit. The sympathizer kind of goes into a reverie about the nature of God and death and children. He insists that she take the money and tells her to think of the children. After this, the two peek in on the twins, which sends the sympathizer back to his youth and the circumstances under which he learned of his parentage. We're going to kind of delve a little bit deeper into this subject at the end of the episode, so we'll just kind of leave it at that for right now. The sympathizer enjoys a hearty meal with the major's widow. Everything is kind of cooked perfectly and irresistibly. During the meal, the sympathizer begins to understand why the major was so overweight. His wife is a phenomenal cook, nearly without compare. So the sympathizer is really eating well today because he had the soup from the madame's restaurant earlier in the day, and now he's having a crazy multi-course meal with the major's widow. After his visit, the sympathizer visits the liquor store for some supplies, a bottle of vodka, a carton of cigarettes, and a Playboy magazine. And he debates on giving Sophia a call, but eventually he decides, I'm going to save the dime. I'm just going to drive out there. So he drives through a sparsely trafficked Los Angeles and arrives at her house. She answers the door and obviously can't believe that she's seeing him. He effectively vanished for 8 months without really calling or writing or anything like that, and then randomly shows up at her door. She pulls him inside, and he is surprised to see a familiar face sitting on the futon with Sophia's black cat. Sonny rises to greet the sympathizer and extends his hand affectionately, saying that him and Sophia talk about him often. And that's kind of where the chapter ends. We end on a bit of a cliffhanger for the most part. I'm excited to see where Sonny is involving himself in this situation. This is also the first chapter that I've read kind of on the timeline, with the release of the videos. Before, I had read up to, I think, chapter 12 and was 11, and was going back and making the videos. But this time I read the chapter yesterday, and I'm making the video, a day later. So all of this is still really fresh in my mind, and it's definitely a bit of a different experience, and I'm enjoying it a lot. But like I said, the sympathizer learning about his parentage, his father for the most part, he knows who his mom is. The sympathizer learning about his father is kind of the topic of our in-depth conversation today. So let's get into that. So I know that I said earlier that some of the best writing in the chapter takes place during the conversation that the sympathizer has with the emissary and Violet in the hospital. But I actually think that the sequence that we're about to talk about is kind of the best in the chapter. We get so much good stuff about the sympathizer's youth. We get to see his mother being the kind of amazing mother that we've been told so much about how she is. And we get to see the kind of violent reprisal from a young sympathizer that foreshadows his future nature, more or less. So we're back at the major's house. The sympathizer and the widow are standing over the twins, Broccoli and Spinach. I just think it's important to mention their names whenever possible, just because they're hilarious. While looking at the children, the sympathizer considers the fact that they won't grow up without a father, which is something that even as a bastard, he was fortunate enough to have. The sympathizer reflects on the lessons that his father, who he was unaware of his relationship to at the time, taught to the local village children about the Bible, the history of the Catholic Church, and the kind of nature of original sin. During his early schooling, he was unaware of the fact that the priest was his literal father until one day an incident with a schoolyard bully kind of causes his life to change. In the shade of a eucalyptus tree, the cadre of school children watch a couple of dogs mating, which prompts an onlooker to comment on the sympathizer's parentage, referring to him as a bastard in front of the other kids. He doesn't actually really call him a bastard, but he says that the sympathizer is an unnatural offspring similar to what would come out if a dog and a cat were to mate. The sympathizer sees red a little bit, and he kind of pounces on the bully, beating him mercilessly until the blood and the whimpering force him to stop. The other children look on in a cocktail of fear and respect for the sympathizer, his brutality quieting them into a stunned and submissive silence. And then the sympathizer just goes home. He immediately bursts into tears upon seeing his mother, but for the most part, he doesn't really have anything to worry about before he gets back to his house. She comforts him, telling him that he is God's gift to her and that his existence is perfectly natural. She says that it's time for his childhood to end, and she offers to inform him who his father is. The sympathizer agrees, and of course is stunned to hear the name of the Catholic priest that has been teaching him and his schoolmates about the Bible. She comments on his father's kind nature and the fact that he was a teacher to her as well, of numbers and of culture, and even some of his own personal youth in France. She's insistent that the sympathizer is a piece of God's great plan and that he is destined for great works and to never be ashamed of his parentage. She refers to him as the meek that shall inherit the earth, kind of at the end of their conversation. And back in the widow's house, the sympathizer considers this last point. He wonders that if she were still around today and if she knew all that he had done up to this point, if she would consider him meek still. I think that this segment is super important because it does well what all good writers do when confronted with developing characters. It shows us and doesn't tell us. You know, for so long we've been told about how great the sympathizer's mother is and about how, supportive and fantastic she was during her life, and we even mourn her death with the sympathizer in the Hamlet cemetery. But this is really one of the more tender episodes where we kind of get to see the type of mother that she was in real time. Granted, we do get the squid episode after he pleasures himself with the deceased squid, and we get her kind of cooking dinner and that kind of thing, and we get some stuff about her support for the sympathizer before he leaves for college, and kind of the episode with the aunts and uncles during the New Year's celebration, and about how she kind of tells him that they're both going to show them, but this really was one of the situations I felt that you really get to see the sympathizer's mom being as good as he describes her. Even though she was a single mother raising him in poor conditions, she was insistent on his worth and the fact that he was wanted more so than anything. I think it's super easy to blame a child for their existence, but the sympathizer's mom never really thinks about doing that. She maintains his value as not only her son, but as a child of God. So I think that this kind of religious affirmation of his existence is really important for his development as, a person, and I think that part of the reason why he gets so defensive and so angry, more or less, when people refer to him as a bastard is because he doesn't see himself as such. He's someone who rose to his level based on his merit alone, and I think that to call him a bastard kind of devalues a lot of the work that he's done and the things that he's done, and it's the reason why. I mean, it just makes sense, it makes sense as to why he would be frustrated when people refer to him as such, because it's such a low blow. It's such low-hanging fruit that it kind of overlooks all the other things that they could potentially be indicting him on, And I think that that's important for him, is that if they had something interesting or compelling or at least original to say, it wouldn't bother him quite so much. But it's the fact that everyone just calls him a bastard, that he's tired of it, and his mom was so supportive of him growing up that he doesn't even really feel that he was anyway. I think it's also important to kind of see the early signs of the sympathizer's nature when it comes to the confrontation with the bully. We've seen him kind of in the presence of his family when he's referred to as a bastard. He kind of shuts down more or less. And then we've seen him as an adult when he's ridiculed in the same way by the soldiers in the street at the very end of chapter 1. So we kind of see, and of course, we see more recently, we see his reaction to the Watchman during the interrogation that's kind of looked over by Claude in the end of last chapter, or maybe 2 chapters ago. I can't really remember at this point, but we see the Watchman, how that whole sequence ends with his actions upon being called a bastard. So we've seen what he's capable of as an adult when, this kind of gets brought back up. But in this section, we really get to see what the young sympathizer's reaction is to the insult. And we can kind of see the underlying brutality of the young man. He punches him once, and that isn't really enough for him. He punches him once, he starts bleeding, and then he punches him again, and then he kind of jumps on him and starts wailing on him until the stunned silence of the crowd and the whimpers of the beaten young man, I think that they kind of all come together to more or less shake him back to reality. And he's left with the actions that, have brought him here. For as much as he would kind of claim to be nonviolent, or at least to have an aversion to violence, because I think that he does, he claims to have kind of an aversion to violence, a lot of the time. Obviously, with the Major's death, that was something that he was and is still having a lot of trouble processing. But even prior to that, we really don't get a lot of of the Sympathizer being a violent person. He's kind of devastated at the Watchman's death. He cools the heads of all of, Mon and Bon and the 3 soldiers at the end of chapter 1. He is not really an active person when it comes to committing violence. So to kind of see this side of him, I think it's important because it shows us a little bit more of his nature, because this is a bit more of an unfiltered situation. He doesn't kind of have his whole life experience to force him to be nonviolent. He just kind of lets himself go. And of course, he is a child at this point, and kids make stupid mistakes, and whatever. I'm not trying to. If anything, I'm trying to say that the Sympathizer is good. I think that he's got a good nature at the end of the day, and he generally doesn't care for violence. But this situation, I think, is the first time that we really get to see him unleashed a little bit. And it's just super interesting and super refreshing to see, because, you want to have your characters have a little bit of flaw in them. Not that I'm saying sticking up for yourself is a flaw. Not that I'm saying that. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that, the Sympathizer, for the most part, he has been doing okay. He's been doing well throughout the book. And this is just something to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit and show a little bit of a skeleton in the closet. I think that's all that I've got for this section, and I think by extension, I think that's all that I've got for chapter 12. Like I said, this one is a catch-up episode, which I feel like we definitely needed. We get to see all the main players, the General, the Madame, the Major's widow. We get to see Sophia. We get to see Sonny. We don't get a lot of time with either of them, but just to know that they're going to be coming down the pipe is exciting. I'm excited to get back into seeing Claude. Yeah, just kind of getting back into the flow of things. And now that the movement has kind of picked up a little bit of steam, it's going to be exciting to see where that storyline takes us. Like I said, I didn't realize how much I missed all the other characters and how much I relied on, those other perspectives in order to think differently about the Sympathizer, or maybe not think differently, but just broaden my scope of consideration of the book without those other perspectives in there. So now that we're kind of getting back into the flow of things, getting back to having the usual suspects around, I think it's going to start to pick up. We get a little bit of a lull with the Hamlet stuff. Not that it wasn't good, not that I didn't enjoy it, but yeah, I'm excited to be back to the old ways, more or less, and just to kind of get back into the natural flow of things. This is, like I said, this is, I think, probably the best chapter since the murder of the Major. I think that was 8. I don't remember, but I think that this has been, this chapter is really, really awesome. Thanks for watching. Go ahead and listen to The Boys Are Back in Town by Thin Lizzy, just to get your motor running for this chapter, because that's really all that it is at the end of the day. And yeah, let me know what you thought about the chapter. If I missed anything important, please give me a shout. I'd be happy to discuss it. And I think that is going to do it for today. So again, thanks so much for watching, and thanks for making it to the end, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.